Good morning, Warriors. Back with another episode of Vigor Warriors 2 and the 1% Club. I hope you guys are doing well today. Hope you guys had a nice evening and enjoyed a couple of videos we did yesterday. Thank you for all the subscriptions, comments, likes. We're getting so many of them that I have to kind of give shout outs like 10 at a time or something like that, because we have so many people making comments that it's just amazing. So it's subscriptions I think are about 1,500, so I feel very blessed about that. Thank you very much, guys, for all of that. A couple of shout outs here. Deepak, thank you so much for your comment. Amirul Islam, thank you for your comment. Ishar Israel, I think it's Sandagan, thank you for your comment. James, and if I get some of these wrong, please accept my apology. I'm trying to kind of say it phonetically as I look at it. James, DSM Tech, thank you. 3Frenchy3, I think I see some ones there. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe I'm wrong. And so tell me if I'm wrong. I can always correct it. PK Wealth, thank you for your comment. Talking about loving the cats, and I have one in the background there, so thank you very much for that. The Rising King, thank you. Drunk Vigio, George Amici, thank you. BT, Gospel Ninja 2.0, Mark, and Casio55. So thank you guys for your comments, and I appreciate those a great deal. And I feel very blessed that we're up at almost 1,500 types of subscriptions. So that's great. So our topic today comes from our great viewer Truth Seeker, and a shout out to Truth Seeker on this one. Asking about a question, and I also DSM Tech also contributed to this as well. So shout out to DSM too. Talking about the Catholic Church celibacy and semen retention. So we'll talk about this a little bit with dealing with the church and celibacy and semen retention. But I'm going to use an article here first from Katherine Harvey, and it's in a thing called Notches here, and we'll kind of put the link in our description here. But it talks about the topic of this is called Death by Celibacy, Sex, Semen, Male Health in the Middle Ages. So looking through this article, we're going to kind of talk about this a little bit of history here. So we talk about information here. This is kind of providing you guys information about the history of this topic, how it's kind of gone back and forth over time, so you understand why people think like they have and why in modern society we still have some of those thoughts and ideas that way as well. So we kind of look at this. This article kind of talks about, and you can, like I said, take a look at this. But a lot of this kind of started back in the late 20th century. And Gerald of Wales, the Archdeacon of Beacon at that time, I know I said Brecon at that time, wrote a text about 2 decades after the First Lateran Council, 1123, this was in the 12th century, had introduced compulsory celibacy for all priests. Now, the idea was at this time is they had felt like that in order to have any sort of relationship with God, there had to be some celibacy, some refrain from all the sexual types of behaviors that people had. And so Gerald had written that because of some of this, there was some ill effects that people had, especially the priests, of taking this celibacy and not having sex. And so they talked about a couple of different examples here in which people they couldn't remain celibate, and they felt like that they were getting sick. And in this case, I think the cause was swelling, and then in the reproductive area, and then dying a few days later. And so they had a couple stories that this article talks about where people ended up dying, and people said, well, this is the reason was because the priest wasn't having sex and they couldn't have sex, and so they died, and so everything kind of swelled up, and all of a sudden this was a problem. And so then Gerald's claim was that a few weeks without sex would be sufficient to kill a man. And so this kind of was talked about for a number of years at that point, that if you did not do that, all of a sudden that energy would back up and you couldn't control it, and it would be swelling, and all of a sudden you would end up dying. And so, as crazy as this sounds, this is kind of what the prevailing attitude from this article is talking about during the Third Crusades. So there was 4 areas that medieval understanding of the body focused on at this time, and it all kind of came from the Greeks and the Hippocratic school, and also developed by the Roman physician Galen. And so what happened was that the thought was that you have to release these fluids from your system. You know how crazy it sounds now in some ways, but you have to release these type of things. And it wasn't obviously talking about transmutation or any kind of things, using information. So medieval understanding of this was based on the four systems of liquids. So you had blood, you had phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. And those are things that were developed back in ancient Greece and those type of things. And that this was a type of thing that you'd have to expose out of your body, or else it would be a problem. And so semen was part of that. And so that's why they had talked about years ago that if you did not do that, you had anxiety, depression, headaches, weight loss, and then death. And so this was the whole idea behind this thing. And so that's why they in a lot of those cases, they were talking about you had to admission. So have admissions. And so that's why the church was not totally comfortable with this idea. And so it kind of went back and forth in a lot of different ways. You still had celibacy, but the idea that was hesitant. A lot of priests and people were not too sure what would happen to them if they did this. And so the medical situation was they basically said you have to be pragmatic about it. So the medical doctors and the church officials kind of went back and forth on about this. And so it really wasn't something that was totally, one way or the other, but it was something that was a theory out there, both theories. And so there was a demand between the church and the medical field. And so they were actually opening, and Galen and a few other people all recommending masturbation, all kinds of things for celibate men to deal with this, because they obviously felt like the best thing was to do to release the energy. So here's what the bottom line really is with this kind of article you're talking about. But back in those days, the medieval days, now we're talking about 1123, so that's almost 900 years, right? When you look at this, what you're basically saying is that people went into the priesthood basically knowing they had to be celibate, but because they were worried about the ramifications of that and death and things like that, they felt like the recommendation was to go ahead and look, and masturbate and things like that to be able to survive. And that was back in those days. So when you kind of fast forward to what we're talking about now, the idea has always been is that you have to be able to, and it goes back to the same old thing, you have to release. And this is where all the modern science and all the people are saying that you need to go ahead and release to be able to be healthy. And that's what the thought was, and this is what I was listening to for years, as many of you guys were listening to. And so the thought never occurred that you could do something else with that energy. And so we talked about those fluids and the energy that comes from that. In yesterday's talk, we talked about Da Vinci, who wrote about Galen's stuff and said that there is a connection between the brain and the semen and those things that are developed. And so those type of things have an impact when it comes to you and how your health is and your body is with all this. And that goes back. So this is not something that's new over the last 100 years. It's really something that's been around for 8, 9, almost 1,000 years we're talking about here. When in fact people felt like that if you did not release, then you would be subject to a lot of problems and health issues and things like that, and depression, anxiety. So then my experiences over the last 930 days have been the opposite with those. And you have to ask yourself the question, well, why is that? And so as you think about this more, I understand the philosophies. I do understand a lot of people over the years have been celibate, and so they haven't actually had sex with someone else, but have they released and all those type of things too? And there's a good chance many of them did. But the question then becomes is that what is the answer with all of this, right? And so as you think about this, I don't believe that back in the Middle Ages we had this whole idea of the energy aspect of it. And I don't believe that you also had transmutation, because Napoleon Hill in his book Think and Grow Rich in chapter 10 talks about this whole idea of transmuting that energy you have and all those fluids that come along with that, because your fluids are going to be directed a lot by what you're eating and your thought patterns and all those things that you focus on this thing. So as we look at this, I think the thing that was missing, in my opinion, back in those situations is the fact that you could have someone who would be celibate, but they would have to transmute that energy. This is why I talk about that if you are on a journey here and you're looking at retaining, but you're sitting around, you're playing video games and you're not doing constructive things, and you're not motivating yourself to use that energy in different ways, well, what's going to happen is that you can get frustrated. And so some of the things that we talked about in the article talks about are things that can very easily happen. I'm not sure about death, but a lot of other things can happen. Depression, anxiety, those type of things could happen because you're sitting there being frustrated. And you're not basically kind of acting in a transmuting way and trying to get something else done, which means weightlifting or working out or going to work or doing hobbies or working on the house or doing things, constructive things, building things, doing things. Those type of things allows you to transmute that energy. So I think this is a very interesting topic, and thank you again for Truth Seeker bringing this forward, because when you look at this idea, this is the thought pattern that has to be in all people's minds as they think about it, all men especially. So this is probably why I struggled with this for so many years as well, because in the back of my mind, even though I didn't really know the history, a lot of this until I started, learning more about the Catholic Church and realizing that it came out of the Roman, the Holy Roman Empire. The church came out of the Holy Roman Empire. And I didn't realize a lot of that stuff until I started, researching a little bit over the years. But you realize that a lot of the things that we talk about have been passed down for centuries, and looking at this type of stuff. And here's another one of those examples where there was always this idea about, releasing energy. And, what did the Romans do? What did the Incas do? What did the Mayas do? What did the Greeks do? What did they all do with these type of situations? You look at Babylon, you look at Sodom and Gomorrah, all those things that happened that was releasing energy and those type of things, and they were doing a lot of deviant behaviors, and they were totally out of control. You compare that to somebody who was celibate, okay? Now they're talking about those were things happening to them that were not positive because they were too celibate. And so this is why they've kind of gone back and forth over the centuries looking at this. And this is why you can look at the videos now and see there's a lot of people talking about you have to release several times a week for your own health. It's good for your prostate and all that kind of stuff. On the other hand, you're seeing a movement to talking about the fact that you have to go ahead and kind of save your energy, and you want to save your nutrients, you want to save things within you. And so this is a long historical type of perspective that both sides, feel that there's truth to. And when you look at this thing, obviously our key thing is to procreate, because we want to be able to have children multiply and keep moving. So you're obviously going to need to do that. You're going to need to have sexual energy to have that. The question then becomes is when you're sitting there and saying, okay, am I releasing so much to the point where I'm just kind of making myself too weak, and now I have all this other stuff. And we talk about this with the brain research that Da Vinci talked about and other people have talked about, where it affects your brain to the point where now all you're thinking about is having intercourse, and all of a sudden now it's lowering your levels of health and tolerance and all those type of things, because you're losing a lot of your nutrients. So obviously, there's a balance in between here. If you have one person, a wife or a husband or someone else that you have with you, well, then it's a different type of situation. But that's a more controlled situation. And remember, guys, this is a lifestyle change. The more you're saving your energy, the more you can use it for other things and motivate yourself. There's nothing wrong if you, in my opinion, have a person that you're with that you want to have intercourse with, those type of things happen. And even actually, you don't even need to release with that kind of stuff either. But the question comes back to what we're talking about with these articles and everything. And I think it's a great perspective to look at the history of celibacy here a little bit, and the history of semen, the history of looking at how doctors looked at this. And obviously with those fluids that we have in the system, the thought that still pervades a little today, for the most part, is the fact that you have to release those type of things in order to stay healthy. Now, If you're releasing those things, you're releasing energy as well. And so the question then becomes, is that good for you or not good for you? And so I would really encourage you to do a lot of research with this as you're doing it. Obviously, the people listening to me, you guys are the ones who believe in this. And that's why some people think it's a myth. Some people think it's good. Some people don't think it's so good. But in my experiences, this has been a very good thing. And, my health has actually gotten better. I feel tremendous. I don't have a lot of these other issues that they were talking about in this article. Obviously, those things would have happened early on as well. Now, the thing you have to kind of think about, Bud, is what are we doing different? What are people who have been on streaks, like a Mike Tyson, 5 years? Nothing happened to him, right? In fact, he got more aggressive. He was in his height of being a warrior and knocking people silly, right? And knocking people out in 30 seconds. Why? Well, because he was transmuting it. See, the energy has to go somewhere. And obviously, if you're sitting around doing nothing, you're not going to transmute it. So I believe, in my opinion, as I'm looking at all this stuff, the difference between the Middle Ages discussion and now the discussion about the fact that if you don't release the energy, something is negative is going to happen to you. The difference is the whole idea of transmuting, which Napoleon talked about in his book Think and Grow Rich back in the 1970s. Because if you can transmute, then that energy now is no longer sitting there and just building and building and building. You're moving it back through the system. Just like when we talk about Da Vinci saying that the brain basically kind of sends a signal to go ahead and get excited and, start forming that, semen. Once you start doing some methods like the breathing method, breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, and out, all of a sudden your mind fills with oxygen, and now what happens is that the nutrients come back through and they go back up in your brain, and so now they stay within the system and you're not killing yourself. All right, anyway, I wanted to kind of do this one because Truth Seeker had a great point, and it's a great thing to look at as we continue the discussion with brahmacharya and sophism and celibacy, and realizing that there are a lot of people who still believe that you need to release all the time. But I think as time goes on, if you are able to transmute, I think you feel there's a better argument made that you're going to go ahead and use retention and using it the right way and being more controlled. And really the whole thing is addiction, my friends. You don't want to get addicted to the fact that you have to do this 4 or 5 times a day and you can't stop it. That's the key. That's why the Bible talks about the fact that you should marry if you can't control yourself, because you're able to have one person to do this with instead of multiple people, and that's going to kill you in many different ways. All right, my friends, you guys have a great day. I'll try to do another one later, and we'll see if we can try to focus on God Identifies with Lions from DSM Tech as well. Until then, my friends, have a great day. Remember, every new day is a great day. Every day is a new day to a wise warrior. God bless you guys, and battle on!